I'm Mark Harper here. I'm a solution consultant here at GlideFast. I'm based down in Atlanta, Georgia. And today we're going through a discussion around CSDM, what's new with the Common Services Data Model in version 3.0, and a little bit about the product functionality that's available now in the platform. With me today to do the presentation is Brian Wong. Brian, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, Brian Wong, Service Delivery Manager and Architect with GlideFast. Yeah, as Mark said, just here to talk about CSDM 3.0 with everyone.
All right, cool. So yeah, if you want to just move on to take a look at the agenda. So we're going to begin by just doing like an overview of what CSDM is, what its purposes of CSDM actually is on the ServiceNow platform. We take a look at how we've changed from version 2.0 to 3.0. Then we're going to look at some of the ways that we can now track our adoption of CSDM and the progress that we're making in that space with some effective dashboards and metrics inside the platform. And then it's pointless applying CSDM without a use case that's going to consume this. So understanding how this is going to be applied across various areas, whether it's ITSM, whether it's APM, SecOps, it's all going to have a tie back into the Common Services Data Model. And then Brian's going to lead us through a demo of some of those new functionalities and dashboards that's available to us and some of the other things that came in the Quebec release. So I know we've got a Q&A section at the end, but if you have any questions throughout this, just please feel free to come off mute. We can have like an open dialogue. The point of this conversation is for people to become a little bit more enabled, a bit more comfortable, and start to understand a little bit more when we're talking about the Common Services Data Model. All right, so just a little recap of what we're actually talking about here. CSDM at its heart really is a framework of where we should be storing certain data inside of the CMDB. So a little bit of like a history lesson. If you went back to like the Istanbul release, you had different classes of the ServiceNow platform in the CMDB that was used for slightly different use cases. So if a customer bought ITBM first before ITOM, you'd be using the business services and service offerings in a slightly different manner. And it caused conflicts with some mature customers that had purchased everything. So ServiceNow had to take a little step back and reevaluate what the definitions were for things like a business application, a business service, an application service. And we had to get customers away from populating everything in the CMDBCI Apple table or application table, or even other custom tables or software packages table, where realistically they should be storing business applications and application services. So we're on our third iteration of this right now. So that suggests that we didn't quite get it right the first go around. And there was a couple of classes that was missed. For whatever reason, ITOM doesn't always get the love it deserved, and they forgot that a certain class already existed. But that was fixed in version 2. And in version 3, we just continue to iterate rather than revolutionize the model. And also in the third iteration as well, we started incorporating tie-ins to other things outside of the CMDB. So this is an additional domain, which we'll cover in a moment. But one thing to remind your customers is it's going to be a journey. It's not something that they're going to just be able to hit a button and it's going to fix all of their past mistakes. They have to do a little bit of due diligence and understanding of what their current data set means, the definitions of their data sets, and go through an effort to align their potential customizations to the definitions within inside CSDM. And some of like the key reasons why we want to go through this effort is we want to put the data in the places that ServiceNow expects the data to be. So if you want to use some of the out-of-the-box performance analytics dashboards, some of the out-of-the-box workflows, it's going to be looking in this space for that data to exist. And if it's in a separate table or a custom table, it's not going to be able to be leveraged in that capacity without some significant customization. So let's just take a look at the overall data model. So this is how we're looking with the version 3 release. And on an immediate look, it is slightly overwhelming. We've got these different domains with various different classes involved, different users that's associated with these various different classes. And a lot of customers look at this at first glance and says, I'm not going to get started on this. I don't know how to approach this. It's too overwhelming. I'm just going to stick with my current state because it's working for what I want to do right now. But for what a lot of people are looking to do right now, it's just simple ITSM processes. You starting to mature, moving into things like software asset management, vulnerability response, security incident, it really is imperative that we start aligning to this appropriate model. So I try to get customers to sort of look past this overwhelming movement of data and just start looking about what these domains actually represent. We can sort of just put them into like a single definition for design, technical services, and into the consume. And customers start understanding a little bit more about what we're trying to achieve here with CSDM. So this design phase, where you find your business capabilities and business applications, these aren't operational CIs. This is where we're storing like the design of and the makeup of the business. It's also where we may be associating any of the financial information, the contract information, understanding who owns these various different digital products. When it comes down to the operational elements of these business applications, this is where we have the managed technical services domain. So down here is where, if you utilize discovery, all of the results of discovery is going to be put into this bucket. If you start doing service mapping, this is where you'll be the outputs of service mapping. Again, will find themselves in this bucket. There is tie-ins to that design domain, and essentially like an instantiation of a business application is the output of service mapping that finds itself in that technical services domain. The other domain on the right-hand side, we've got sell and consume. You can think of this really as the service catalog. This is your business services and the offerings of those business services that your end users can consume. So it might be going through and partaking in the onboarding experience. This is going to be a service offering that a business puts forward, and it has some tie-in to the actual technical side that delivers that experience. And then in the top right, this is the new domain. I say new sort of in quotes, and that was added in the 3.0 release. But this is just where we tie into other areas of the ServiceNow platform. So it's typical reference fields that we have on the configuration items, such as group, users, location, department, various different things that can enhance the process areas, and some forms of the automation that goes in that leverages the CMDB. So while it's a new domain, theoretically, it should be data that already existed, but we have a dependency on it on having a successful CSDM rollout. So let's just take a little step forward, and I just wanted to put like a quick reference chart in to showcase like the different classes that we're referencing from a label perspective and how this actually ties into the tables on the back end. Because as you can see, there's a few different areas where we're leveraging the actual same table. We're just changing one of the fields on the table to represent the CSDM concept. So looking at service offering, for example, service offering can be put into technical service offerings or business service offerings, but it's all defined just by the service classification type. So before we go much further into how we can actually lead through a journey for customers to adopt CSDM, does anybody have any questions at this point, or any success or failure stories that they want to bring forward with conversations regarding CSDM with their customers?
I was kind of curious. This is Nick speaking. So as of like CSDM 2.0, a lot of the functionality that they talked about, like populating, incident assignment groups and things like that, and being able to walk up to service offerings and things like that from an incident based on a CI, that wasn't actually functional. Do you know if they've addressed that in 3.0 and started to build in some of that functionality to support the framework?
Yeah, so we actually have a few ways that's been improved upon in that space to derive things like the assignment group or approval group. We can actually set that at the class level itself, or it can be inherited from some of the dynamic CI groups as well to specify what those values are, so they can be automatically derived during that that task process.
And how about like the service offering stuff?
Provided that you got the relationships in the appropriate direction and they're combined together with that configuration item, then you can define like the up-down impact that's going to be associated and then derive that population. I don't know off the top of my head if that's something that's automatically going to run based on the selected configuration item. Part of the challenge that you're going to have is some configuration items may support more than one offering.
Yeah,
So
I think
getting through that one field is not going to work exactly, but you've got the related list for the affected CIs and impacted services at the bottom of the task.
from what I understand, like that is for new customers only, because building into like task related records that used to be customized a lot by customers, so that there is a new business rule that auto populates the assignment group for you on the task record, but that's only for new customers. I think as Quebec, I think.
Right. Yeah, I saw that part. Because I was mostly concerned because we've done some service portfolio management stuff before with availability calculations and things like that. And it wasn't always easy. I mean, the service offering to get that information populated was very manual. And that was a big barrier to adoption for service portfolio management.
So in that situation there, did you associate to just the single referenced service offering on the form, or did you do the related list?
We did related list. And yeah,
Which, I mean, it does make sense. Like, it comes back to that situation, like the impacted CI, the thing that's actually the root cause, may be impacting many different service offerings. So doing a one-for-one is probably not going to be realistic in terms of what's truly going on.
Yeah, to get the availability to calculate against the offerings, it has to be in the related list, and it has to be associated to an outage, and the outage needs to be associated to the service offering, and it's like a whole thing.
And that's still part of the challenge that customers are having with adoption is, for one activity, there's 3 different things that need to occur. And it still causes a little bit of frustration. And even when it's building out like the model itself, when you get into technical services and technical service offerings, you start to get a lot of overlap with what you've already got defined elsewhere in the hierarchy.
Thanks.
Yeah. So talking a little bit about how we move customers forward with adopting CSDM, we try not to overwhelm them with that overall model showing all the various different classes and the movement of data. We try to get them just to step back a little bit and just understand some of the purposes and like a journey that they can go through. And even in this crawl and walk phase, you can leverage a lot of the value of what CSDM can bring to our customers. So just taking a look at what is represented in this crawl stage, we're really just looking to define what our portfolio of applications are at the business application level. So the likelihood is this is a list that already exists, whether it's unfortunately on somebody's spreadsheet, or they may have some form of APM tool, like a true, or they even have APM from a ServiceNow perspective already. But we can load that in. It's a fairly standalone CI from the very beginning. And then we're looking to associate the operational aspect of that business application with the application service. So if you take like an example of your business application could be SharePoint, the application service would be SharePoint Prod. Or if you have geographical regions, it might be SharePoint Prod US, and you might have a similar one, SharePoint Prod EMEA. And then as you start to mature, if you have discovery, for instance, you can associate that application service to the underlying technologies that deliver that application service. So to try and get to this level to bridge that gap without some form of automation does pose a challenge because it can be dynamic in nature if a new server or a new application is spun up to support that application service. So this is where we highly suggest that you leverage discovery, and if you're in a position to mature further, leveraging service mapping. So this is what we propose from going to a crawl phase, taking a little step further, getting into a position to get walking.
Do you mind if I ask a quick question on the other
Absolutely.
slide? So just going back to the crawl phase, a lot of the clients that I've been on regarding the business application service, and application really get those confused.
Yes.
And they have different approaches on how they handle those. So can you just maybe just spend a couple of more seconds on those particular definitions and how they relate?
Yeah, so if we run through our scenario still of SharePoint, so SharePoint being the business application service would be SharePoint Prod or SharePoint Prod US. And then the step further down where we've got applications, this is going to be like the running executables on servers. So your payroll Prod US may be actually made up of a cluster of 10 servers, all hosting SharePoint running process. So you have 10 application CIs, all for SharePoint, that roll up to the application service of SharePoint Prod US, and then business application of SharePoint. So you have that hierarchical model that represents how that SharePoint experience is delivered. And then you also can tie that into the operational nature. So if that application CI, so that one instance of SharePoint that's running goes down, because that's a cluster, it may not impact the entire application service because it may be running in some form of load balanced or redundant setup, but it will still be represented as a potentially an alert or an incident that has some sort of service degradation.
Okay, so if I understand the applications, the exe file, or those kind of files, right? The application
Yep.
service is more like the domain, like .us or
Yeah, and it's
.eu
also
or
the
whatever.
application service is the grouping of all of those different sort of executables and the servers
Okay.
that they're running on to deliver that application service.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
And
I
then
like
the
to
business
explain it as
application is a broader name of
Yeah.
it, the business
yeah.
name.
So the
I'll
business
show you.
app is kind of what you're paying for. It's like what you bought, like ServiceNow.
Right.
And then the application service is the environment.
Okay.
And then, everything below that is the discoverable
And the other thing
components of that environment.
The other thing that Mark mentioned is like that top design section is not operational, right? So you wouldn't necessarily open incident problem changes against that business application layer. It's really the app service or the infrastructure layer below that.
Okay. So for end users, when they're submitting an incident, they're not going to know, the application or the application service. They probably
Yep.
won't, right?
Yep.
But they'll definitely know the business application like SharePoint.
Yeah,
So
and I think
how do
that's
you?
that's the reason why we're kind of trying to build out this model, right? Like you model this infrastructure up to the app service level so that when somebody does go in and submit a change, they don't necessarily need to do that. That's automatically tied in through the relationships that we've built, right? So
Okay.
that's really the importance of doing this mapping.
Okay.
And also at the point in time when they generate the incident, they may not actually know what to select. And it may be after the due diligence sets in that, or even after you've done your root cause analysis, that you can come back and update that incident record or potentially change record to reflect the accurate CI that should be involved.
Okay. Yeah, that kind of makes sense.
And in a couple of slides as well, we've sort of overlaid an example using ServiceNow to fill many of these classes. So again, hopefully that just helps a little bit in terms of aligning some value to these classes.
Sure.
All right, so let's just quickly glance at what we step into from a walking perspective. This is where we start incorporating the technical services and technical service offerings that's used to support these application services. So this could be like your hosting services, and then you have a technical service offering for Windows hosting, Linux hosting, depending on the granularity that you have in play. Taking our example again of like SharePoint, you might have a technical service of like collaboration, and then the technical service offering is a catalog item where somebody can request their own SharePoint site. And that's a way that you can control that rollout or like the positioning of SharePoint within the organization that has the tie back into that application service. So you can start to understand what the impact would be if SharePoint was to go down on the technical service offerings and the people that subscribed to that service. And then if we take a look at like a overall example model, this is where we've taken like ServiceNow and we've applied where ServiceNow would fall within inside the CSDM. But one thing I wanted to call out is we have a level of hierarchy on the business application level where we've defined ServiceNow as a platform host, and then it provides the platform apps of things like change management, HR. The mid server is also included here. And part of the reason why I wanted to put the mid server in is so that we can draw that consumes relationship down to the application service and actual installed infrastructure that's found within inside the data center. So just following that chain down for the mid server, this is where we see the mid server Paris prod. So it's the environment based for the application service. And then it's got the relationship to the Java application that is the installed version of that mid server. We have the relationship to the server that Java application is running on, and then the association with the technical services and the technical service offerings from a Windows management perspective. So we've got the operational side associated with the business application. And then on the consume side of the hierarchy, we've got the way that your end users and consumers can interact with these services. So taking the example of ServiceNow HRSD, we can see that it's associated with the human resources portfolio. It's part of the new employee portfolio category, where we have a business services for onboarding. And we offer the onboarding experience via a mobile method or an enterprise onboarding, maybe through just a standard website. And we can see that that is associated with the application service of HR Prod. So we still have an application service for like SaaS-based products because they still have some operational health associated with them. We just don't have the dependency relationship to any form of infrastructure because we don't have that visibility to something that's hosted externally to ourselves. So let's just take a little look at some of the forms or other areas inside the platform where we'll be leveraging this. So take a little bit about change management, populating the configuration item, and we'll see this in the demo as well. We can use just the CI itself to start understanding impacted services, automatically populating the assignment group, and then using it to be more objective when it comes to risk calculation rather than allowing the end user who's submitting the change to put it in as high priority, low impact, please approve my change, which is what I usually try to do. And if we pop up the next image, we also start to get a bit more like enterprise visibility of what the impact of that change would be. So I've been part of a number of data center migrations where I've had conversations with like service owners who truly believe that the database or piece of infrastructure or application is completely independent to themselves and they can make whatever changes they want because there's going to be no impact to anybody else. But once you start to specify the appropriate relationships, you start to see that various different application services do in fact have a dependency on some form of data, whether it's via an integration, an API call, that we want to make sure that they are also involved with any form of decision-making or just from a notification standpoint that something involving the application service they support is about to be changed. So by having these appropriate relationships in place, we have that level of visibility. We understand the criticality of these services that then can derive the risk of that change. In a similar manner, from an incident perspective, we can use this to effectively govern the priority of an incident that's coming through. And just in the same way we saw with change, it does show us the potential impacted services that's come through from that incident. If we take it one step further from a maturity perspective and looking at it from event management and the ITOM capabilities, we also start to see like the potential root cause that comes through from looking at changes that may have happened in the environment. And then finally, looking at it from a quite a mature perspective where we've gone through a service mapping effort. Sorry, Brian, I think I missed you on one of those. Yeah, from a service mapping effort, we've got these various different relationships in place, and we're overlaying the alerts that come through. And this can be associated with like topology-based event correlation to try and reduce the noise and number of alerts that we're dealing with. And then in the workspace, we can associate those with the application services again, so that we can get the operational health of the various different services that we deliver into our end users and customers. And then the last slide that I'm looking to cover, I just wanted to put down some reasonings as why various different roles would care about applying CSDM effectively. I won't go through them all individually, but they're there for you to read through. But essentially what it comes down to is just putting the data where ServiceNow is going to expect that data to be placed. If it's in the right place, we can start improving and influencing the various different process areas that's going to derive value for each of these different roles.
Hey, Mark, do you cover this in that workshop, that free kind of like, let's have a conversation workshop that you do for clients?
We do, yeah. So in that CMDB workshop, and the agenda is pretty much made up of talking about configuration management governance, use cases. We have a section on CSDM, and then we have a section on populating CMDB. And that population section is where we're really pushing discovery, because that's the next actionable step from a CMDB maturity perspective. Okay, any questions there before we pass it over to Brian, who's going to cover some things that's a bit more in the platform of what's actually been made available in CSDM 3.0.
All right, I just had a few more slides to cover before we get into the demo, but just wanted to highlight kind of what some of the things that we've seen that's new in CSDM 3.0. So as Mark mentioned, we have a new foundation domain that really just kind of talks about core data that's kind of used across the CMDB. We also have a new CSDM application navigation pane, just easy access to all the various classes that we're talking about. Get into a little bit of the dashboards on how we're tracking progress, not just with CSDM, but also the CMDB itself. Tables have also been renamed, relabeled, so we'll cover that a little bit. And then lastly, we've talked a little bit about use cases, but ServiceNow puts out specific product guides that are applied to various products within the ServiceNow platform. So things like change, incident, service portfolio management. There is actually guides on how you apply CSDM to those products. Yep, just as mentioned before, the CSDM foundation domain, just core referential data that's used across the platform, things such as groups, product models, contracts, data, locations. That's another key one. Groups and users is also another set of foundational data that typically we would expect the CMDB to have. The CSDM application navigation pane, this is new as of Paris. And the reason why this exists is really just because we're talking a lot about various classes that was previously a little bit difficult to find. So they're just grouping it under a CSDM menu so you can find that data easily. I'll show you this in a little bit, just easier access. I'm going to show you this in the demo, but basically there's 3 dashboards that are part of kind of the CSDM framework that helps you just keep track of specific indicators that ServiceNow thinks is important for any customer. So we'll dive into that a little bit. I'm not going to go through the next few slides. These are just details on the various dashboards, but I actually want to show you that instead. Yeah, this one I will talk about. So relabeled tables, just showing you the difference between various releases. So the big one really to cover is really that the technical service table. In the past, we used to, in event management, we used to use a service table with a classification of technical service. It actually has its own table now that's part of the dynamic CI group. So we see it here, and that's used for event management. Yeah, so I'll just leave this up here so you can see it, but these are some of the kind of labels that we've seen changed in the various releases. And the last slide, I think, before our demo. Yeah, so these are the expanded product guides that we talked about. So I think there's 8 of them now, and I think they're constantly releasing more of these, even without releasing like a 4.0 version. Some of these are coming out. There's a pretty active community forum on CSDM, and I'll show you that here in a little bit, but that's something to reference as well. Just get a different perspective from other customers as well too. It's a pretty active forum. All right, so now I'm gonna just jump into the demo portion. All right, so first thing I'll show you is the application navigation pane. Like I mentioned before, if you just type in CSDM, as of the Paris release, this is available now for customers. So everything from linking the docs site to be able to read more about CSDM. We have one of the dashboards that we'll cover, and then it's grouped by the various domains that Mark mentioned earlier. So all the classes that are specific to a certain domain, these are all grouped under its domain. So it's just easier to be able to access these classes without having to like type in specific class and know what table it's actually referencing. Dashboards is actually one of the new releases, also I think as of Paris as well too. So this CSDM Data Foundations dashboard and also the CMDB Data Foundations dashboard, it's a plugin, free plugin available from the ServiceNow store. You can enable that for your customers to be able to understand both from a CSDM perspective, tracking progress against, adopting the CSDM framework. So looking at this CSDM one here, it's grouped by the various domains. The foundation domain is actually new as a plugin update. So previously only had these 4, but just walking through what some of the things that they're looking for in the foundation domains. A key one is like custom configuration status values, right? This is typically highly customized by customers, and you really want to align back to what ServiceNow expects in those status values, right? So it tells you how well you're doing, and also the other cool thing is it links to an actual playbook URL. So if I click on one of these are all public art ServiceNow support, and it gives you an idea of the reason why this metric is important. So the goals of improving the score. What's the problem with not aligning, with what ServiceNow is expecting? So it gives you a little bit of analysis on why, status values should, align to out of the box values, why customizing it could cause problems. And then ultimately, how do you remediate that? How do you align back to what ServiceNow is expecting and then ultimately aligning with CSDM? So it really gives you a step-by-step analysis on what it's about, what the tasks involved, and then the remediation steps to kind of get back to out of the box. So these are available for all the metrics. I'll walk through some of the other ones on the crawl stage. Some of the things that we're looking for, as Mark kind of talked about, application services rolling up to a higher level, business application, that kind of the business application level, that really is a portfolio of all your various, environment services. So your prod, dev, QA versions. If you look at the walk stage, various other metrics that are involved in that. So service offerings with a no support group or change group in the run phase, custom service tables. This is another common one, right? As Mark mentioned. In the past, like what I've seen with a lot of customers really is they just didn't have these service tables when they first implemented the platform. That's the reason why they started using various tables. And as they upgraded, they haven't really kept up with adopting some of the new service tables. So this metric here helps you kind of understand what service tables are available out there, and then how do you get it back to what ServiceNow is expecting. Quickly go over to the CMDB one as well. Yes, the CMDB data foundations dashboard is key indicators on, just wait for it loads. Yeah, key indicators on CMDB data itself. So things like duplicate CIs in the system, how's the quality of your CMDB data, serial numbers on Harper CIs, inactive one is another key one. Is it being updated by an automated source so you don't have to keep track of it? And is it stale and out of date? Here are some of the metrics that ServiceNow thinks is important. Insights as well. Yeah, just give you an idea of some of the things that is important when you're kind of implementing a CMDB and aligning to CSDM. What are some of the metrics that are important to evaluating how healthy your CMDB is? And this kind of goes hand in hand with, if you guys are familiar with the CMDB health dashboard that tracks other key health CMDB metrics as well. And the last dashboard, so the application services really, as Mark mentioned, tying infrastructure to a specific service, right? So this dashboard helps you keep track of key values and metrics that you would expect on an application service record. So things like assignment group, an owner, support group, its relationship to a higher level business application, and then also the population method, right? Like, are you, all the application services in your environment, are you actually populating them with infrastructure data? So this helps you understand where, you may not be potentially mapping specific application service. And then in the related focus areas, this helps you understand where there could be infrastructure components that aren't specifically tied to an application service record, right? So in most cases, you don't necessarily want, databases or servers that are just kind of hanging out there and don't have a relation to a service. So it's not actually supporting something. You typically don't want that in your environment. So these indicators here help you keep track of where there may be somebody deploying something and you don't really understand its impact back to a service. So a couple other things I just wanted to mention that's new as of the Paris release. We talked about how you populate group values on specific infrastructure records. So as an example, oftentimes we have CIs that we don't have basic information for, basic ownership, like who's going to update this record, who's responsible for it. Now, as of Quebec, you can actually automatically propagate down a specific group, in this case, a managed by group, to the records that are part of this class, right? So by default, you may say all your Windows servers are managed by a specific group, maybe Windows server group. By setting this value at the CI class, in the CI class manager at this Windows server level, all new servers that come on the environment will automatically inherit this value, right? So you don't have to go, back into individual CIs and try to populate that and try to figure out who's responsible for what records. So I can just show you that here. If I save this, if I look at a list, we can kind of see that these aren't populated now, but if I give it a couple of seconds, we'll see that value is actually applied to all individual records. Yeah, there you go. Right. So now we'd like a problem we see quite a bit, right? Is like who's responsible for what. So right now, we don't have to worry about that. And obviously you could override these if they're not tied to a specific group. But by default, at least we have a starting point for where to go in case there's an issue.
Brian, will that overwrite existing values as well, or just blank ones?
Just blank ones. Yeah, that's not existing. Yeah.
Nice, thanks.
Yeah. And then one other thing that I think is new as part of Quebec is, lifecycle mapping. So lifecycle mapping is, I think I talked about in the data foundations indicator, is custom status value. Actually, I have it open here. So what's happened a lot with customers who've been on the platform for quite a number of years, they've modified status values, operational status values, and it's just totally misaligned with what ServiceNow intended for those values to kind of represent. So lifecycle mapping is a way to take those values and kind of normalize it and put that into a new field called lifecycle stage and lifecycle stage status. Out of the box, it's going to have mappings that ServiceNow has seen other customers. You could also add your own in here for custom values that you have in your environment. And then once you activate this lifecycle mapping, it's going to take those values and then normalize it into these lifecycle stage and status fields. What is not really clear at this point, and I think it's going to be part of future releases, is right now we're not saying like change incident asset management, these values. We're not actually changing what the underlying workflows behind them. But I think as we move towards Rome, we're going to try to use like these status values instead of the old status and operational status. This is fairly new for Quebec, but I think more functionality is due to come out for that. Cool. So let's talk about mapping a little bit, right? Like, so we've talked about all these classes. Like, a difficulty that customers have is really just mapping and using the correct relationships. I think in the previous slide we saw like the mapping table is quite detailed. What customers get confused on is like what specific relationships to use. So let's take an application service, for example, and we'll go through that mapping process. What's your question?
That was just me sharing some links to the CSDM community page and the Now Learning Fundamentals for CSDM.
Cool, thanks, Mark. All right, so let's say like I have my payroll prod application service. It's not mapped, it's just kind of imported into the system without any relationships. This application service creation wizard I think was new as part of the Paris release. So it's really a step-by-step process to help you create the CI and then map it to the correct relationships. It's kind of defined by CSDM. So you have things such as the name, you can put the environment, add the support group, change group, manage by group, things like that. Basic information about the application service. And then down here below is where you're actually setting relationships to various business applications, service offerings, and then also a parent application service. So I'm actually going to go select. Yeah, I know this is my payroll prod. It rolls up into a business application called My Payroll. I'm just going to add that in. The infrastructure is supported by a technical service offering called Windows Server Management. That in. On the business side, we also know that there's a business service offering for mobile onboarding for this My Payroll application. So I'm going to add that in as well. This parent application server, this is new as of Quebec. And I think that what this is intended for is really, as Mark mentioned, kind of that platform host and the platform application, understanding where maybe this application service could be supported by an overall parent application service. So you could add, in the case of maybe a microservice, that could potentially roll up to a parent application service. Right? So in this case, I'm not going to add anything here because there is no parent, but just know that this exists out there. Yeah. So the next part is really populating this application service with the infrastructure. Obviously, an automated approach using something like service mapping would be the preferred approach, but I'm going to manually create the entry point in this case. Right. So I know the entry point into this is a web server. Right, so I've added the entry point for the service. It's a web server, IS web server. And then the last step is really just to kind of confirm all the relationships in the population method before you kind of update this record, right? So again, all that relationships we set, we don't have to care about what relationship type to use. That's automatically added for you. So we know we're aligning to CSDM, and then also the population method as well here. So I'm just going to update this. Now we're able to view. I apologize for that. Yep. Okay. So here we have the entry point here. What we're saying is the first layer is really an IS web server, right? So if we click on this, what's really neat about this is like if we had something like discovery, this web server will sit on a server, right? So we can see by just clicking on the CI the server that that sits on. So you don't have to necessarily add a specific server. It's like you're just adding the application components here, and then you're seeing how that application is supported. So for this app, it's a typical 3-tiered application. It has a web server, it has an application server, and a database. I'm just going to quickly create this map manually, just so we can kind of fully understand the full architecture of this application. Just adding the application server, and then lastly the database. So now we've fully mapped our application from the database tier all the way up to the web server. So we can take a look at this just to see how it looks like, how it rolls up to the application, business application level. So I'm just open it. Yeah, and now we have the full dependency. Add a couple more layers. See if there's anything else mapped to it. Right, so we have this database server supported by it runs this application server, web server. We can also see it's mapped to 2 application services. So in this case, our prod and our QA versions uses the same infrastructure, right? So this is just helping us understand where maybe in a shared environment, various infrastructure could be supporting various applications or services. And we also have our service operating, so we also added in business application and how it rolls up to it. Previously mapped our capabilities as well. So this is all great and all, like we've built out relationships, but really kind of applying this is really where the full value is. So we're just going to take that change example again, just so we can walk through the benefits of really mapping and kind of aligning to CSDM. Look at a change that I've already created.
But a question for you on the business service. I noticed the service offerings weren't mapped directly to it. Is that by design?
You're talking about this one here?
Yeah. So you got I guess you don't have a business service in here. You just have business. Okay, I read that wrong. Never mind.
Actually, these are this is a business service here. So this business service is actually supported by my payroll, right? And then you can kind of see based on.
Well, it's a service offering.
Yeah.
Right. So the business service is HR, right?
No, sorry. Yeah, you're correct. Yeah, this would ideally be referenced for an actual service. So it could be, my payroll mobile, right?
Okay.
That could be the business service. I just don't have it here.
Gotcha. Okay. Thanks. Just want to make sure I didn't miss something.
No worries. Good question. Right. So I had this change open here that previously, let's say I'm a DBA. I'm opening a change against this payroll SQL database instance, right? And it's a minor change. From what I could tell, this is not going to impact any services, right? This is typically what I would do to kind of get this change approved. It's low, moderate risk. I've scheduled the change for a specific time. As we previously mentioned, we could actually auto-populate this assignment group based on this value, right? So the support group or the assignment group on this record is HR systems. We could automatically tie that in so that the user isn't left guessing on where this change is going to route to. If we look at impacted services, previously before mapping, we already knew that this was tied to the QA payroll version, but we could also refresh impacted services. There's a UI action for this, and you could also, it automatically runs in certain cases, but I'm just going to rerun it again to see if it picks up, it'll update based on the mapping where this CI could potentially impact. Didn't quite pick it up here. It might be an issue. In most cases, this is really showing you from a relationship level, if I select a specific CI, we're like without the user even selecting a service, based on relationships, we're able to pre-populate specific services, right? So really helping the user understand, even though I said that this is not going to impact any services, by having that UI action, it's all populating based on relationships in the CDB to understand where there could potentially be a service outage. And then the other part of that is, as a user, I always want to push changes as fast as possible. So I'm going to say low, moderate, low from a risk and impact perspective, but I can recalculate the risk just to make sure, like maybe this is tied to a specific service, right? And this is based on our risk calculation scores, we can automatically change the risk score based on the relationship that this has to a specific service. So if I bring up my application, I'll show you here, right? So this is my payroll prod, because that CI is tied to this application service and it has the business criticality of most critical. In our change, we're automatically selecting or changing the value of the risk and impact, right? Because of that service being critical. And then the last thing I wanted to show you is conflicts as well. So I scheduled this change for a specific period. I know, like, for my SQL databases, I may have a specific maintenance windows, but if I look at the conflicts tab, I can actually see that there is a conflict detected because the service itself, when I'm making the change for this, it's not actually in the services maintenance windows, right? So again, we're kind of just showcasing the power of the relationships in the CMDB to be able to help the users understand when specific conflicts can be detected. And I think that was it for my demo. So just wondering if there's any questions at all. Mark, I'm not sure if you wanted to add anything.
Hey, Brian, I have a quick question. I worked with a customer before, and like before CSDM, right? They mapped everything in the dependency mapping, which is a different view of what you show. What's your recommendation? Did they have to start new and start doing that relationship in the new service mapping in order to be able to apply this?
Me personally, I don't think so. In most cases, no. Like if they're not like an event management user and it's not going to be using that service mapping dashboard, I would say the dependency views relationships will get you this level of understanding within the CMDB.
Got it.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Brian, would that depend on if they're using the right relationships? Like if they're doing it manually?
Oh, the manual part? No,
Yeah.
actually, no. The like calculating which services are put here, no. If you actually look at the script that populates this, it only cares if it's a service. It doesn't really care about what type of relationship.
No, I was talking about Michael's question, with customers that did it manually through dependency mapping views.
Oh yeah. In that case, I would say, like, yes, you should kind of realign them.
Yeah.
Back to what the suggested relationships are.
Mhm.
But from a functionality standpoint, it really doesn't impact how this is calculated.
Oh, okay.
Hi, Brian. This is Nate. Can I ask a quick question before you drop off?
Yeah, no worries. I can
Yeah.
stick around.
So, do you have any collateral that talks a little bit about scoping? So, I have a customer that is very interested in applying CDSM, but one, they have a very low maturity level, and then two, they have a lot of legacy processes and applications, and an old way of doing things. So, what are the kind of the key attributes? If you're trying to scope something and trying to determine the sizing, the complexity, and how long it might take to implement CDSM.
It can be a little bit tricky because you really don't know how much they've messed up ahead of time. And then you also don't have full visibility in what kind of dependencies exist. Now, if you go to that community page and search like in the forum for a script, there was a script that was put together. I think it was at either Knowledge 19 or Knowledge 20, where it starts looking at existing dependencies on that like incorrectly created record. And that gives you a sense of where that like misaligned or misappropriated record is used across the platform. And as you start to apply that script repeatedly, you can start to understand how much of a mess they may find themselves in. And then from there, it's carving out what that plan to move them off is. Sometimes it may be as simple as just consolidate into the business application table, because that's probably the closest alignment to what they may have got populated so far. And then start to build out like the application services, which is something that probably hasn't been created at all so far today from a environment and operational perspective.
Yeah, and just to give you an idea from a practical example, I've had two customers that are kind of trying to align to CSDM. So the first customer really just wanted to move specific CIs back to the right class. And that was like maybe like a 2-month process. Like there wasn't that many dependencies after writing that script. A current customer that I'm working with they had a ton of business rules, scripts that were dependent on certain tables. And that's going to turn out to be like a 9-month effort, trying to get them back aligned to CSDM, right? So it really varies from customer to customer depending on the dependencies they have on where they have misaligned classes.
Okay, thanks. That's very useful information. So if I go, I'm on the community page, so I should search for something like dependency script. Is that what you're suggesting?
I could send it to you as well too. I have it here.
Okay, all right, cool. Yeah, I appreciate that. Thank you.
What's cool is last week Share the Wealth with fetch code. I think that's another really good application that we get to use to find dependencies, because the script that ServiceNow puts is kind of basic, but I think if we leverage what fetch code can do, I think that might be even better for customers. Maybe as an offering to customers, I think.
Yeah, that sounds like a great idea. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thanks for the attendance. Thanks for the question.
Thanks, everyone.